Have you ever thought about living in a foreign country for 6 months, a year? Have you ever thought about living in a foreign country with family? How about with kids? How about with kids in school? The one and only Coach Carson has done all of the above. We're going to find out what he learned. Did he like it? Was it rough? All the good and the bad. How you doing, man? What's going on?
Doing great, Michael. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. So one of the things that you have done that I've heard hundreds of people talk about is pull up stakes and purposely go live in a foreign country we're not talking a vacation. We're talking live in a foreign country. So why don't you just highlight where you've been, the durations, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, so the very quick backstory is my wife is a Spanish teacher. And so her passion in life has been foreign languages, studying abroad. And so when we met, that was our spark. We were like, we got to do this. And so we fast forward and we have taken three big trips abroad, one before we had kids, two with our kids, and our kids are now 10 and 12. So kind of in their 10 or 12-year lifetime, we've taken two big trips. The first one my wife and I did was that in the middle of the Great Recession, actually 2009. And I just figured out that we're going to survive the recession. Our real estate businesses are going to go under. And I decided I just need a break. And we decided to go to Spain and South America, both of them, but we set aside a 4-month period of time.
Mm.
And so that was the first time we were not financially independent. We had a little bit of income coming in, but we just financially surviving, and we just saved some money. And it was equivalent of like buying a new car. We saved 20 grand, 18 grand, and said, we're just going to go abroad. And my goal, and this is typical for me when I go abroad, is having some sort of personal development goal or something that you want to explore that's not practical, that's not related to your business. And for me, that was learning Spanish. And so I took Spanish classes in Spain. We, of course, saw a lot of sites, but the difference between this trip and all the trips we take is we love vacations too, going to the beach, decompress, but this is more of you're uprooting yourself, you're placing yourself down there, you're living there. And one of the best ways to learn a language is to actually live with families who speak the language you want to speak. And so my wife and I lived with families in Spain. We also went to Peru and stayed there for about a month and a half, lived with a family there. And so when you're speaking every single day, you're having to ask them to pass the salt in Spanish, and you're having to ask for, what's that food, or explain this, and having conversations. It was where my Spanish really blossomed at that point. It's gone back down and then goes back up over time. But during that month in Peru, I was taking 4 hours of class a day, going to all sorts of activities in Spanish, and actually got pretty good at it at that point.
Yeah. So when you start making these journeys, it's really about immersion, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not a Duolingo or some 30-minute
Yeah.
a day thing. It's almost survival, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got to figure it out, right?
Yes.
So that's pretty amazing. So that's the one you did with your wife, but a lot of people are like, I want to do this, but I'll do it after kids, right? I'll do
Yeah.
it when I'm an empty nester. You and your wife said, BS, we're going to do this with kids. So talk about that first one with kids.
Yeah, it can be harder with kids. I'll say that. There's obviously anybody who has kids, the logistics of even getting to a restaurant and getting out the door with your kids could be like a nightmare. But the reward is that you go there, and if you have this idea of immersing yourself, which is what we did, it's even more rewarding when you have kids, because one of the coolest things of any travel is when you connect with other people. And so there's other people there who have kids too. I don't care where you're going. People do have kids all over the world. And so you're on the playground, you're in classes. Our kids, the first trip we went with our kids, they were 3 and 5. So we did wait until they were a little bit old. A 3-year-old can actually start having a memory. They can remember
Yeah.
what they did. They can communicate a little bit better. So we went to Ecuador in South America, and moved to a city called Cuenca, Ecuador, which is about 8,000 feet up in the
Mm.
Andes Mountains. It's the third biggest city in Ecuador. And I love Ecuador. I love the Ecuadorian people. I love that place. It's a relatively small country, but it's got essentially the rainforest jungle on one side, the Amazon basis. It's got these high mountains where we were in the middle of the country, and then on the other side, on the coast, you have beaches and the Pacific Ocean and the Galapagos Islands. And so you can within 4 hours, you can be in all sorts of different places. And we were in one particular older city called Cuenca, which is a very comfortable place, but also really friendly. And our kids went to preschool and school there. Happened to be like an elementary private school, and they wore the uniforms. They got picked up by the little bus every morning. They had 6 words of Spanish when they started, and we threw them in the deep end. And adults can learn too, but kids tend to absorb it even faster. But it still took about 6 months for them to become fluent in Spanish. So we got there, let's say January of 2017. And by, end of their first school year, about 5 or 6 months in, they were correcting me because I had a head start on them in Spanish. And we would sit down at the breakfast table and we'd all speak Spanish, and they would look at me and say, "Papa, no se dice eso." And they would like wag their finger at me and tell me how bad my Spanish was. And I knew we were in a good place then when they picked that up.
And how long were you at this city for this journey?
That was 17 months. We gave ourselves 12 months, and then we had some flexibility though. So this is a real estate story too, of course. We rented our house back at home to a couple, and we told them it's 12 months, but maybe we might be flexible. And as we got closer to 12 months, they're like, we'd like to stay longer. And so we extended it another 6 months, and they actually would have gone another year, but we had some family health issues and my wife's mom and wanted to get back to, but it could have gone longer. And we had great tenants and loved when you can get income from the US, this is a whole separate topic I'm happy to talk about. But if you get income dollars from the US and you can live in another country and you strategically pick the right place, it's called geographic arbitrage, where you can spend money that's less expensive somewhere else using dollars that you're earning in the United States. And you can really get, a lot more out of your dollar. For example, we lived in a pretty nice 2-bedroom apartment in exactly the place we wanted to be in Cuenca, Ecuador, for $600 a month for the family. And we probably paid up a little bit more than if we could have shopped even more. And our kids went to private schools. We spent $3,500 a month at most living. That was 2017, 18. So it's gone up a little bit, but the equivalent lifestyle would have been $6,000, $7,000 a month in our hometown in South Carolina.
I think this is the beauty. This is why I encourage it, right? A lot of people dream, but yeah, you can look for those arbitrage, right? If you there's a lot of folks today that have these little side hustles that make 1,000, 2,000, whatever, dollars. We're not talking millions of bucks. It could be a couple of grand. And if you live in a foreign country, you could be middle class plus.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, get all the extras. So let's talk about this first time with kids. They were relatively young, 3 and 5. They're obviously being immersed. You threw them in the deep end. They're correcting you after 6 months. Do they still have friends that they communicate with today from that time that long ago?
It's the first trip has sort of dwindled. The next trip we went into, yes, there are some friends. That the 3-year-old, she remembers the trip, but it was preschool, and what's interesting is Spanish for a preschooler, or English for a preschooler is pretty limited, right? I mean, you're communicating, but you're not talking in full sentences. You're not,
it's words, not.
Yeah, it's like islands of words and not putting it all together. So she is not communicating with any friends there. Our older daughter has a couple of friends that we've done some Zoom calls with still in Ecuador. So and we've talked about wanting to go back and see them again. But yes, there was connections there, tons of memories. We look at little scrapbooks and discuss it. And I don't know all the little seeds we planted with the trip, but I do know there is a kind of resiliency of having to be in a new place. A lot of military kids know this, or people who've traveled where their kids have to go from one place to another and they're having to make new friends. And there's a courage that you get when you're placed in a new place. And sometimes that can backfire. I know other parents who've taken their kids and their kids are a little bit older. They're like, I don't want to do this. I hate you for this. And so there's a tension there. And it's not all easy. It's not all pleasant for the kids, for the parents. But my wife, who's done a lot of study abroad and helped other people do it, says there's always like this hurdle you have to get over, this hump month. It might be like 2 or 3 months in where everybody kind of panics and says, what have I done? Like, this is horrible. Like, this is the biggest mistake of my life. And I'll tell a real quick anecdote. We we are in our apartment. We had been just kind of roaming around. Even when we were in the US, we were living with family for a little bit before we left. So it'd been like 2 months, and we were in Ecuador, and we finally got our apartment that we rented, the $600 per month one. It's supposed to be clean. It's supposed to be nice. We go there like in the evening, and we get the kids in bed. We're exhausted, and we lay down on the bed. And I hear my wife say, just got to take a deep breath, looks over, and there's like hairs, like human hairs on the pillow and on the bed. And then the bathtub had like dirty rings around it. And it's not that big a deal, right? In the big picture, now that I'm even saying it. But after all that stuff, we're like, we just want to be in a clean place, have our space.
That's all I want is clean, please.
Yeah, you're in another country. It was one of those moments where we freaked out. We're like, at 10 o'clock at night, just like, what are we doing? This is a mistake. The next morning, though, I slept on the hairs and just said, move on and put a towel over it. And you kind of get over it. So I'm just saying, anything you do, including these kind of travel trips, it's not going to be all roses, but the growth on the other side of that, and the experience for my kids who made friends and connections, and for us, and putting ourselves outside of our comfort zone. Like we all know, like the other side of growth, the other side of discomfort is amazing. Growth. It can be growth. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the most recent experience, because this is the one I think that trips up a lot of people. A lot of people, when they're single, they think it's possible. A lot of parents with, let's just call it very young kids, kind of sub 5, think it's possible. But boy, you get a couple of school-age kids where they're starting to get those friends, and they start getting really cranky. Like, again, I don't believe you're doing this to me. How'd you pull off this third one that you just completed?
Yeah, so our kids were 10 and 8 when we left. So about 11 and 9 when we got back. It was a little more difficult. But I think the fact that we had the prior trip gives us a little bit of a leg up. They could say, oh yeah, remember Ecuador? That was fun. Remember how we did that? Spanish wasn't quite as intimidating. If they had zero Spanish, it would have been difficult. But what's interesting, they had all that 17 months of Spanish in Ecuador. We came back in 2018. We didn't go to Spain until 2022. So 4 years, their Spanish was not fluent anymore. Like we tried to speak at the dinner table. It was back there in the back of their head somewhere, but it took them a month or two to get back into it. But they still had that experience. And the other thing we did, we really threw them in the deep end in Ecuador. Whereas when we went to Spain, we were much more conscious of like kind of the psychological challenge of it for them. And so we chose a school that was a little bit more of an international school. It was a public school, but we were in Granada, Spain, and Granada, Spain's already a very international city. It has a pretty good expat community, which I recommend. I know when you immerse yourself, you want to be immersed, and you say, I want to be with the locals, and that you do. Like you do want to meet friends locally, but you're still an expat, and you're never gonna, in my opinion, you're never gonna 100% be a local. And so you need your community, like you need roots. And so we found a place where there was a pretty good number of expats. And the school we went to was a local public school, but there was, a lot of internationals, not just people from the United States, Australia, Switzerland, from other parts, and France, and lots of places in Europe, but also Asia. And so that was pretty cool for them to have that connection with other people. And you can, with kids in middle school and later elementary school, having the social connections is a really important part of that. And it sort of eased the transition psychologically. They were not as quick on their Spanish though, because they were speaking English with even people who speak other languages. Everybody speaks English. So their Spanish didn't quite do as well as it did in Ecuador, but in the big picture, it was like they made some really cool connections. This place where they went to school was like overlooking the Alhambra, which is the big fortress in Granada. Just amazing historical place. But we're sitting on a place where like 5 or 6 layers below the houses you're in are, Roman ruins and Moorish ruins, Islamic Moorish ruins in Spain. I mean, so as a history buff, somebody I like to walk, I like to study cities. I'm a big on walkability, and I like history. So just every day, just walking around the town for me was just like a kind of a playground of places to learn and things to do.
If for a moment we were to have your oldest child on and just ask them to just kind of talk about that experience, was it enjoyable or not, kind of black or white? If they were to maybe tell a personal story or memory that you hope they have, what do you think they'd say?
They would say, in short, it was a great experience, and I loved coming back to my house.
I love being home.
Yeah. Well, my mom and dad, my wife and I, we were like, we wanted to stay in Spain, actually. We would have been happy staying. Our oldest daughter, though, was like, hey, Mom and Dad, like I did this. I liked it. I'm ready to come back. And so it was, and to the point where when our kids, when we walked back into our house, they were doing basically snow angels on the hardwood floors of like the living room, just like, oh, this is our house. We love this. And so I think that for them was an appreciation of kind of going back full circle, the contrast of another place with their home, helping them feel a sense of having a home, which I think is pretty cool. I think this is our place. This is where we have family. These are the trees we have in South Carolina. These are the things we like. At the same time, though, they loved it when they were there. And I think they would say some of the memories were the being able to have more independence, and at least in European big cities. And Granada is not a huge city, a small city. Once we were comfortable with the location, our kids would go to music practice and we would just say, all right, see you later. They would walk by themselves to music practice. We would often walk with them to school. It was about 500 yards away, pretty close, but they could walk on their own. They had friends that would walk together. So there's just every culture has their differences. The Spanish culture and a lot of European cultures are more okay with young teenagers being more independent and doing some things like that. And we came back to the US, it's like kind of like, the helicopter babysit kind of mentality of, oh, you got to cross the street. Let me hold your hand. You're 13-year-old, like, no, they're 12 years old. They're 11 years old. They could do this. And I think that independence, they've come back with a confidence and, a sense of like, here's my style. They're both into creativity and design and things like that. So I think they've developed a confidence, developed a kind of a style of their own, a individuality of their own, which I think was a really good thing. And they liked coming back because it's just easier. You go to school and you speak English, you have a cultural similarity with people, which is easier for them. So I think it was kind of a both good and good being there, good coming home.
Yeah. So when you kind of put in you're a dad, right? When you think, 10 years from now, they're in college or maybe they're graduating college or young adults, do you think they're going to look back and realize the opportunities that you and your wife gave them, that they're more broad, they have more of experience? Because there's a lot of folks, I forget what the percentage is, but they kind of grow up in, wherever they were born, they grow up and they never go 50 miles from that. Do you think this experience is something they'll be able to go back to?
I think so. Yeah, they've already talked about it, and which has been really gratifying for me as a parent, that they have been thankful for that and said this was a really amazing experience, and that they're glad we did it. There's two sides of my mindset as a parent, though. Like, one, I hope it's a gift. I hope that practically they can speak Spanish. That's pretty nice. That's pretty helpful in the job market. It gives it every job out there. If you could also speak Spanish in the United States with the Hispanic population we have and the Spanish speaking community, that's really important. I think that's important to me. The cultural just awareness, just the humility. Humility is such an important virtue that I think is not always there. That, hey, we do things this way, but there's like thousands or millions of different ways people do things in the world. We've experienced a few of them. Just be humble about that. Like, this is one way, that's one way, not one better, not one worse. I hope they take that. But then I also, at the same time, when they come back here, it is a reality. This is a luxury experience. This is part of our financial independence freedom journey that we were able to go. I don't want them to necessarily just like, oh, look at us, we traveled to these other countries. Like, I also want that hope they have that humility enough to say, this is not better that we did this, but this is who we are. This is part of our parents are weird for what they are. They like to travel. They like to study foreign languages. Real estate. I've tried to integrate the financial lessons of this, like being open about the fact that we're paying $1,200 a month in rent over here in Granada. Where's that money coming from? Oh, we have this house back in the United States that we bought, and we didn't buy this biggest house we could. We bought a reasonable house that we love in a neighborhood we love that also could rent and for enough to cover expenses, and we don't have a mortgage on the house anymore. And here's the numbers. So it's been educational on the financial side, to the point where my youngest daughter the other day was like, yeah, when I go to college, will you help me buy a duplex so that I can, house hack and live in one side, and I can rent their bedrooms to my roommates. As a real estate educator, you can't ask for anything a better conversation to have with your daughter. So yeah, I'm sure I've screwed them up in a lot of other ways, but at least in a couple of ways we've done some
couple you got
things.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So what kind of advice, top 2-3 things, you're a family, you got young kids, call them 13 or below. You want to go live in a foreign country. I do think you got to pick one that your dollar goes farther. I think that was great advice to the arbitrage you talked about earlier. But what are 2 or 3 things that they should consider before they make the jump?
Start small. Like we did some practice trips. We went to
Okay.
Mexico. Mexico is a place we love, and we went there for I think a 2-week trip just to try it out. We went to Costa Rica for a week. So don't be afraid. Like when I talk about a year and a half, I know for many of you that's gonna be like that's unreachable. That's I
Ah!
can't do that. I can't do that. Right. Start small. Start with a week. So just
Mm,
expand your normal vacation and do a 2 week. But like think about it a little bit differently. Think about it as, hey, I'm just testing this out. Like what happens if we went to this place and stayed longer? And if you, particularly if you want foreign languages, my biggest practical recommendation is to go to language schools in the place where you go. We've had such good luck doing that. And instead of going to like a guidebook or online, start with a language school. First of all, you could take classes there, whatever language you're trying to speak, but they always, always, always have families and they have
yeah.
apartments that they can connect you with. And they'll usually be right in the center of things, not, a hotel, American Marriott hotel in the city. Like, don't do that. Like go to the places where a local, and they're almost like travel agents, the language schools, because they understand that you're going to go through cultural shock. They understand how to help you and to guide you. And so I said, number one, take small steps. Number two, go to a language school. Number three, be flexible with what this looks like. Like for me, foreign languages, studying abroad was like the thing. But I have lots of friends. I have a friend named Jillian Johnsrud who has a website. She does a lot of mini retirements, just getting in an RV with her family and going to the United States to national parks and doing all sorts of cool stuff. And they do it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. They do it every single year. So be open. Like you could go travel abroad. You could go to national parks. You could rent an RV. You could just stay at home. But let's say you're an artist or you're a carpenter or you just want to do something different and take a class. My point is like just get outside of your normal comfort zone, get outside of your normal routine. It's a gift that you give to yourself, and to me it is 100 times more valuable than me if I could have spent the same amount of money on a luxury car, on a bigger house, on stuff. I'm not saying anything wrong with those, but when you buy these kinds of experiences for yourself, and particularly when you have kids with a family, the rewards are just innumerable because you get to experience them for the rest of your life. Every time you look at that picture, every time you have a conversation, it's the best return on investment I've ever had from a family relational standpoint. And then from a personal development standpoint, I don't know if I've told you this story before, Michael, but during my first trip abroad, when I went, me, the uptight type A goal setting person that I still am today, I was so uptight for 5 or 6 weeks in Spain. It took me like 6 weeks to finally relax. And I felt it like a knot in my chest, like physically untied.
Oh,
And
wow.
I know a lot of you probably listen to this or like me or like Michael, we're go-getters.
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't do this sooner than later, if you put this untying of your knot, and there's an anxiety and there's kind of a fear that is for me at least, is the other side of the coin of ambition.
Mhm.
Ambition, anxiety, ambition, anxiety. And if you don't deal with that, then mental illness for me, for everybody is
Mhm.
like, I know you've talked about this openly. It's a part of it if we don't
Yep.
deal with it sooner than later. So don't wait till you're retiring one of these days to live your life, to deal with that anxiety. Like go ahead. It's a personal development journey, I guess is my point
Yeah.
here, that this is an important gift you give to yourself from a personal standpoint.
Folks, at the end of the day, a lot of you have had these dreams. A lot of you have had these thoughts. It is absolutely possible. You probably have lots of questions. So guess what? Chad, if they wanted to reach out, ask you questions, how would they do that?
You search for Coach Carson on YouTube. I'm there. I've got a lot of videos. If you look on my channel to scroll back, I've got some of my Spain videos. Feel free to comment there. I check my comments. I love to hear from you. And then you can also go to my website, coachcarson.com, and I have a newsletter. If you subscribe to my newsletter, I send an email out every single Tuesday. You can reply to that email. It goes directly to me. I'd be happy to hear from you. So let me know what you think.
Give him a follow, folks. He's done the dream, done it a couple of times. You can do it. Reach out to him and ask your questions. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Michael.